Welcome to VLGA Connect, a very special episode where I'm joined by Deputy Commissioner from IBAC, David Wolf. David, great to see you again.
Terrific, thanks Chris, and hello everyone.
We wanted to speak with you about the recently released report into the handling of information and the disclosure of information that's held by local government. Firstly, some context. This is the third in a series of reports, so you've built a body of evidence now across the public sector in relation to this issue.
Yeah, that's correct. So you're right. This is the third report. It's specific to local government. Our previous reports relate to the broader public sector and our role in managing and oversighting police misconduct and corruption activities. So a broad body of work that we've pieced together. There are some nuances for local government, so that's why it has its own report. And the key difference, I think, for this sector is the elected representative element and the administration element. And they're quite separate in terms of the rules, the legislation, and some of the risks that we've identified in this report.
Before we hone in on the local government aspect, what was the trigger for doing this body of work, David? Did it come out of a particular identified need of some sort?
So the underlying issue for this is that the unauthorised access or the disclosure of information underpins nearly all of our corruption investigations. It's either the precursor to or the actual activity of the corrupt conduct. So it's a consistent theme across all of our sectors that we oversight. And as I said, it often is, if it's allowed to occur and goes on undetected or either not addressed in the organisation, it is that lead into more severe and serious corrupt conduct over time. So it's a consistent theme, consistent issue, and something that we found it was really important that we did this piece of work and identify the issues.
So the report itself, David, I've got to say it's a great read. It's an easy read. You open it up, I think it's about 30 pages, and you think, oh gosh, I might be sitting here for a while, but it actually reads and flows really well, and it's quite fascinating. There's some case studies that really make you stop and think as well. I thought perhaps I'd take you through some of the key findings perhaps, and we could unpack those a little bit, if that's okay. So the first finding really is that the misuse of information is underreported. What sits behind that, do you think?
Yeah, so Chris, that's one of the consistent themes across all the sectors that we oversight. And what we found is that our reporting to IBAC in particular, and also to the Local Government Inspectorate, is quite low in terms of information misuse. Where we do get those reports, obviously it relates to quite serious matters, but we understand now, our intelligence tells us that it's far more widespread. And that means it's either being addressed and then not being reported to allow the intelligence holdings to be populated and inform the reasons behind that, or it's not being addressed and not being reported properly. And we think it's more the latter.
So that probably ties in with this next one, which is finding that the majority of allegations about misuse of information are made against councillors rather than employees, but we can't draw conclusions that the only leaking of information happens at the elected level, can we?
Yeah, that's true. That is so true. I think it's really important, right, to specify the two elements of local government. We talked before about the administration and their role, and particularly the role in collecting and collating a large body of information about the municipality and the residents in the municipality. That's really important information, and there are some risks in holding that. And of course, one of the key risks is that it is released without authorisation by mistake. So what we talk about there is the responsibility of the organisations to make sure they've got the right systems and processes in place to ensure the opportunity for that is minimised, and that if it does occur, then there's a system in place to detect it and do something about it pretty quickly. What we also find with the administration is that sometimes information can be released out of mischief, and that's often if there's a conflict between the administration and the elected representatives. There might be a release to try and either embarrass the elected officials or almost to put a person's individual perspective or opinion out there in contrast to the elected officials. So that's one of the other areas that we sort of focus on as well. But I guess the high-end issues are the corruption issues. So where information is released out of opportunity to cause harm or detriment to a person, or to obtain a personal benefit. So there's malfeasance. There's either malice or malfeasance in terms of the release of that information. Yeah. And that can come at a number of different levels within the organisation. And the examples we've seen is that it relates to generally issues around procurement, contracting, financial elements of the council business. But we have seen examples where organised criminal gangs have sought information relating to the municipality and have tried to get that information through administration officers at the lowest levels. So there is a risk at that level. Councillors are slightly different, slightly nuanced again. There's a risk in terms of release of information for a more politically motivated reason, and that might be to harm an opponent or to damage a position the council's taking that might be opposing to the position of their particular councillor. We've also seen releases of information that it's deemed confidential, but it's been released and the council believes they're doing the right thing. They might have stood on a platform of transparency. They believe the community has a right to know. But the legislation is pretty clear. The legislators have said in certain circumstances, it's not okay to release it and it's an offence to do so. So the noble cause excuse doesn't cut it when we're talking about that sort of private and confidential information.
David, I just want to take you back to a comment you made, not to go too far off on tangents, but the issue of material being released for political purposes, not so much by councillors, but by administration, for example, because of a disagreement in philosophy, etc. That points to some other issues, doesn't it? That points to a broader cultural issue about the relationships that are clearly not working in that particular organisation, doesn't it?
Yeah, indeed. I mean, the timing of this report is terrific in terms of a new council. New council has been elected across Victoria. It's an opportunity to reset the way the council is going to operate. They'll set their ground rules. They'll get together. They'll work on their codes of conduct, their behavioural issues, set their strategic directions. But it's also a really good opportunity to work with the administration and for the administration to work with a new council. So we see where relationships are fractured between the two elements of local government, then a whole host of triggers are then evident, and they are the transfer of information between the two levels is not appropriate. There's distrust, there's conflict, and that all goes to the detriment of the actual community they're there to serve. So you're right, where information is being released by administration to harm or embarrass the elected council, that's a real indicator of deeper issues across the council itself.
There's some comments made about material that gets disclosed to media outlets without authorization. That must be a really difficult one to follow through, because I'm assuming media aren't going to identify their sources. What sort of findings or observations can you make about that?
Yeah, unfortunately, again, that's another symptom of a very fractured council. It generally relates to the elected class, and when there is either a decision or a discussion or a complex matter where you've got two factions within the council and one faction's not comfortable with it or not happy with it, they tend to, and with many examples of it being released to media, shortly thereafter the discussion's had or even the decision's been made. And in fact, one example I can remember, it was within minutes of the council meeting concluding, and the story was then published the following day in the major metropolitan newspapers, to the embarrassment of the council and to the people involved in the actual issue. And if I just touch on that, I mean, trust in government and public institutions at the moment is challenged for a number of reasons. And I think it's so important that local government are and do lead in this space, because they have the opportunity to do that and really lead from a community perspective. So having the administration and the councillors treat information properly, not divulge that information inappropriately, to earn and continue to have the respect of their local community is more important than it's ever been from my perspective. So I think, again, this report is really timely to give those little reminders about what's expected and what the consequences are.
You also make some observations about the prevalence now of personal devices, smartphones, etc., that must make it so easy to lose control of your information.
So you look at two key emerging risks at the moment, and one's been the development of technology and the use of technology, which is highly appropriate, of course, because it allows the business to be conducted in real time and reflective of the broader community. That comes with risks and challenges, of course. The transmission and the dissemination of information is done so easily and often without identification. So there's clearly some challenges around that. And let's not forget, in metropolitan Melbourne in particular, we went in March almost overnight from a 9 to 5 Monday to Friday workforce to everyone working remotely. So you couple that up with the use of devices and you've got risks of the transmission of information from the workplace to the employee, amongst employees to supervisors, then back to the workplace. The tracking and the processes and the systems that needed to be in place to ensure that that was done appropriately probably took some time for a lot of organisations to catch up to, but it's so important that that's in place because I think that working environment's going to stay much the same for a long time. I think we'll acknowledge it's probably not ever going to return back to what it was because we've shown we can work efficiently that way. So you've got technology and change working conditions. Organisations have to be really conscious about having the right systems, processes, audit regimes in place to protect information transmission.
And I think I'm right in saying there's a separate report from a few months ago that addressed that particular issue of protecting information and processes in, the remote environment, which everyone's obviously dealing with at the moment. David, we've just been through a changeover of councils, 76 of them, in fact, around the state. Any particular issues to be aware of in terms of that changeover of councillors, you think?
So I think it's absolutely important to recognise that councillors in their role are privy to an enormous amount of information. And that might be by way of communications within the council, might be electronic communications or access to council systems. So I think it's important that there is an audit done and a reminder to all councils that an audit is done to make sure that any outgoing councillors have their access to the system deactivated, and that any material they have in their possession, like files, thumb drives, hard drives, anything like that that might have confidential council information is recovered by the council. It's absolutely important that that's done. And we've seen examples where, one in particular, where a former councillor retained his access to the system for over 12 months after going out of office. And we know that that person was accessing information about current council matters. Secondly, we've got another example where a council retained information about a rating strategy and actually used that to help assist his own business interests long after he was out of office. So it's important that councils are aware of it and they do that audit following a council term, which obviously is quite timely in the conversation we're having now.
David, perhaps one last question. There's some key findings in this report. There's some conclusions. You stopped short of making hard and fast recommendations here. Is there a reason for that? Or if I was to put you on the spot and say, what do you think should happen? What would you say?
Yeah, so firstly, the measure of a healthy organisation is where a report like this is really not needed and everybody's respectful and handles information properly. But what I would say that where you have issues of this occurring, there's some pretty strong legislation under the Local Government Act that deals with how information is used. And for councils in particular, to misuse their position by virtue of information for personal benefit or detriment to another, there's a very serious offence under the Act for that. It comes with a potential imprisonment and a $100,000 fine. Sitting below that, there's a lesser offence which applies to councillors and council administration, so officers of the council. It applies across the board. Again, a transgression against that offence comes with almost a $20,000 fine. So the legislators take it very, very seriously. And I think that's important that people know there are consequences for it. But we go back before that. Like, as I said, a good performing, a high-performing organisation ought have already mitigated for this and not need to have investigations and potential prosecutions. And it's about having the ground rules, having the policies, the procedures in place, making sure that staff are inducted and well educated through all those policies and processes so they understand what they can and can't do and know the consequences. It's making sure that supervisors are monitoring what's occurring in the council, and if there is a transgression, albeit minor, that it's dealt with, because what we often see is little things are let go and they then escalate over time. And it's also about peers monitoring what their workmates are up to and having the capacity and confidence to report it if they see something that's not right. It's a little bit more difficult in a remote working environment, so I understand that, but often we've seen that people have been aware that there's been transgressions and just haven't done anything about it. And I think that the last 2 points are, and I think this is really important for councils, is that the tone from the top, so how the executive and the elected councils conduct themselves sets the tone for the entire organisation. So how they talk about issues and information in either public or social environments is very important, because the staff will take the lead. And the last point I make is around setting your organisation up with to have that proper governance regime, to have the right investment in your systems, your auditing, to either make sure that your systems prevent unauthorised access, but if there is, making sure that the red flags are visible and there's an opportunity to do something about it at the earliest opportunity.
To that last point, David, could I suggest that it would be desirable, advisable even, that every council's audit and risk committee see a copy of this report and have a conversation about how their particular council is geared to being mindful of and monitor these types of issues?
Yeah, look, absolutely. I think that's a great suggestion, and I would hope that most CEOs would have seen it or would have heard about it, but this might also trigger the audit and risk committees to have an involvement. And I think it's a really, really good concept.
Thank you, David. Really enjoyed unpacking that with you. It is a good read. Do recommend it. All the best to you. Look, you've been on VLGA Connect a few times this year. Can I thank you for making your time available so readily, and wish you all the best for the coming Christmas, New Year period.
Thanks, Chris. Really appreciate the time, the opportunity to have these discussions. I think it's really helpful and useful for the sector. So appreciate the time.